So here's the finished sketch of a country pub called the Greyfriar in Chawton, England. So this was a really cool place for me to sketch. I really enjoyed it. And I'm actually doing this painting from Jane Austen's front yard. If you know who she is, she's a famous author, 1700s, 1800s. Her house was in Chawton, one of her houses. And I'm painting what's across the street from it, this little country pub called the Greyfriar. And I just thought it was really interesting. I thought it was unique. It was a cool little, really small village, and I just wanted to capture, something from this village. And this is what I decided on. And it's obviously a very intricate scene, very detailed, very challenging for me. I normally do landscapes and trees and more natural scenes, and this is a very, urban, if you want to call it that, just buildings and architecture, something that I'm not exactly used to, but I'm up for the challenge. I'm up for always challenging myself, pushing myself, so that's what I did. The pencil sketch turned out well, so I decided to move on with the painting. And I'm starting off with the sky here. It's a cloudy morning, of course, about 9 a.m. or 8 a.m., something like that. And now I'm hitting up the road. So I'm using that same color mixture. I think I'm going to mix up a darker mixture for the road. Have more red in it, make it a little warmer. So when I start a watercolor painting or a sketch like this, it's very intuitive. I just go with my gut. I go with what I feel is going to be easiest to kind of capture, or normally it's the sky, sometimes it's the ground or the grass, something, it just depends on, every painting is different where I start out, and I just go with my gut. There's no, don't overthink the beginning. Obviously I'm planning out how I'm going to approach the rest of this painting. I'm trying to think of my head, I'm trying to plan out, okay, next I'm going to do the roof, or maybe the doorway or something. I'm trying to plan this out, and I don't want the colors to kind of bleed together, so I want to make sure the next thing that I go into is not going to be wet color next to it. For the most part, a little bleeding is fine. Having some soft edges here and there, that's not a bad thing. But my point is, to have a plan. With watercolor, it's very difficult, or it can be very difficult. For me, I know I'm getting a lot better after using watercolors now for 6 months or so, maybe not even 6 months. At the time I did this painting, I'm starting to get an idea for how watercolor reacts and how it all works. So it just takes time, but it's definitely a lot more difficult than oil painting for me. And part of it is it's just so unforgiving when it comes to, if you make a mistake, it can be quite difficult to fix it. And one way you can fix it is to obviously just try to take as much pigment off you can with water. And if you accidentally go over somewhere that you meant to keep white or something like that, another way you can is to get some gouache, which is more of an opaque type of watercolor, basically, and use that on top of your mistake to kind of fix it or cover it up, lighten something up. Other than that, when you make a mistake with watercolor, it's just like, oh boy, it's difficult. So it takes a lot of planning, and you have to be very deliberate with your strokes. So I tend to paint, especially something this small, I tend to paint very painterly with watercolor, and I try to let the brush strokes do the work for me, the values and the brush strokes. I try to let those really speak for me. As far as details and things like that, I don't really get into textures and all different kinds of things. I just, use the color variation and the brush strokes to really tell the story to the viewer and let them fill in their imagination. But I just do my best with this kind of thing. It's I'm trying to leave that white trim on the building, trying to leave that there. So I'm just going very slow, really taking my time. This sketch actually took me a lot longer than normal than my other sketches did. This one's almost close to 40 minutes. And the reason being this, so much architecture, and I just had to be really aware and be careful in this beginning stage, and with this whole scene. I just had to really take my time and be deliberate. And I know for me, when I started out with watercolor, it was very difficult. And one thing I had to do to kind of get used to the medium is do a few sketches in black and white only. So what that did, basically you just use you just use black paint, watercolor paint. And because obviously white is just the white of the paper, and you use water to lighten up the black. And the reason to kind of do that, use a monochrome method, and to only do monochrome for a few sketches, maybe a lot. Maybe if you're just now starting out with watercolor, do a lot of monochrome. If you're having trouble, it allows you to really focus on the aspects of watercolor and how to use it. And you don't have to worry about color. You can just worry about values. So I hope that makes sense. You can just focus on the value structure and your brush strokes and really the nuances of the medium. What happens when you paint wet into wet? What happens when you paint wet on dry? What happens if you have just a very little amount of water and a little amount of pigment? You get like this dry brushing effect. So really playing around with those aspects in just one color, whether it's black or red or whatever color you use, I think can be very beneficial in the beginning stages of learning how to paint with watercolor. So the funny thing about this painting, you can see I jumped to the round brush already, this smaller brush. I probably started a little too soon with using this smaller brush. I probably just could have kept going with this larger brush and really did some more washes. But of course I went into the smaller shapes and things. And you can see I actually missed one of the dormers with the red inside the triangle all the way to the left. I kind of missed that. So sometimes I get into the zone and I end up missing some things, and eventually I'll go back over it. I just haven't gotten there yet. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here with this painting, and even though the sketch turned out good in the end, I think going this dark this soon in the sketch and also this small, moving into the brush this small, I think it's a mistake, and I'm okay with honestly saying that. I mean, every sketch isn't going to be good, and learning a certain process. I think me being honest with these kind of process or tutorial videos is going to help you. It's like not every painting I do is perfect, or the way that I did it worked or was the best method. So I hope you can learn from this, and really what I try to do is stick with large shapes in the beginning and the lighter colors, and slowly move, maybe do 1 to 2 layers of light colors and midtones with the larger brush, and then use that smaller brush to do the finer details, darker areas, things like that. I mean, you move from light to dark and big to small. So I hope that makes sense. And another reason why I'm going so slow on this painting, I think, is because in the morning it was very cold outside, and when it's colder out, the watercolor takes a lot longer to dry on the paper. So I had to make sure, like, areas that I'm going to be painting next to, or areas that I just painted, I had to make sure they would be dry before I started the next kind of section, or even the next layer. So see, really I should have painted this area that I'm doing now. This area I should have just painted a really light wash across the whole thing with a larger brush. I kind of got lost in the details and things, and I ended up realizing that I could paint. You can paint a darker color on top of a lighter color. It's not a big deal. So you can see there, I ended up filling it all in. I kind of realized that, hey, I can do shadows, darker shadows on top of this, so it's not a big deal. And I don't know if I mentioned this already. When I find something to paint outside and I find it like this, and the way I found this, and I look at the kind of the colors involved. What colors are there? It's mostly purples, some cool purples, cool reds, some kind of grayish tans. I try to ask myself, what color families are going to be involved in this painting? What's the color harmonies involved? Obviously, purples and reds are going to be a strong element of this painting. So I know I can use some golds to offset the to complement the purples. I can use some greens to complement the reds. There's a lot of different things I can do with this painting now that I know kind of the main color harmonies involved in this painting. Got an ant there running across my my painting. That's what happens when you paint on the ground. You get a few little bugs crawling on you, but it's not a big deal. So I'm going in, I'm putting in some very light shadows on that white trim. Because it's obviously it's in shadow, so it's not going to be the white of the paper. It's going to be a little bit off-white, so that's kind of what I was doing there. Just once again getting caught up in little details. I could have done that, waited till the end of the painting to do something like that. Especially since that other dormer all the way to the left I haven't even filled in yet. So now I'm working on a tricky window here, and I'm really trying to simplify that window and just get the idea that, okay, it's a window with some window panes. That's my main goal. It's just this suggestion of detail. And these windows also have white trim, so yeah, just doing my best here, taking it really slow and just doing my best not to overwork it or anything, and not to not to add too much detail. Just suggest windows. So now I'm going back in finally and filling in that dormer there with the red. And I think this is where I end up messing up. That red ends up bleeding into the roof because that light gray that I put down for the white wasn't dry yet. So now I have color, that red color just bleeding, and I lost the white trim there. So that was unfortunate, but I was kind of bummed out right here, but I realized I had to just let it dry, and then I'll be able to take some of the paint off later. So when you know if something's going wrong, you can't panic. You got to just focus on how you're going to solve that issue. So right now I'm just using a damp brush, and I'm just constantly taking off pigment and taking off water, trying to get that white of the paper back. And it's just going to take time, and I'm probably not going to be able to get it back completely. So now I'm going in with a second layer here on the roof and kind of the front of the building in that red, adding in some shadows, just some subtle value changes. And this is where the painting starts becoming more realistic, is when you start adding these subtle little variations in value, little variations in color. This will start bringing more life to the painting. And I'm going darker now with the doorway there, kind of keying in my darkest values for the most part. Painting in a little sign there on the sidewalk. So this one is very slow, really making slow progress, but I mean there was so much there in front of me. It was very overwhelming. You know, when you have all this siding and then these subtle shadows and doorways, and there's plants all around. I'll end up putting plants in later. And I mean, there's just so many things. There's signs on the front of the building I got to put in. I think I might end up using a little touch of white gouache and some yellow to put in a sign on the front of the building. I mean, there's just so much I was dealing with here that it was very difficult. But I think what I can tell you about this sketch basically is I spent way too much time on these little details, like what I'm doing now. You know, putting in these little windows, and things that don't even look that great. I think I'd spent way too much time focusing on that rather than the whole of the painting. And I probably could have done this sketch in 25 minutes or 20 minutes if I hadn't already been focusing so much on these little tiny details and things. I mean, some of them are necessary, but really I should have waited till the end of the painting to really add in these kinds of things that I'm doing here now. So I hope you can learn from my mistakes here. I mean, obviously the sketch came out really well. It ended up being one of my favorite sketches, but I think just if I would have painted this again, the process would be a little bit different. So I hope that makes sense to you. I mean, I'm not bummed out with the way it came out or anything, but just handling the process, you know, I could have saved some time here, which can be important when you're on a trip like this. You know, I only had this time in the morning to do some painting sketches. So, you know, if I would have done this one in half the time, I could have planned to do another sketch right afterwards. So, you know, it's those things like that can be detrimental, you know, if you're not careful. But it's a learning process. I mean, over time, you just fill up a few sketchbooks, you get an idea for how you work, and really analyze your own process and try to figure out, like, how can you streamline your process? Think about some of the paintings you did and how you went about doing them. And is there a way you could have done them quicker or better, more efficiently, and you could have gotten the same exact result? So, all right, so now we're putting in some subtle shadows here. So these are the kind of details I was talking about that can really matter. You know, these subtle shadows on this building really gives just a very subtle sense of depth, but it's an important sense of depth that really needs to be there. Because now you start to understand that the red roof over it is hanging over the sidewalk. It's hanging over the front of that building. And that's really just an important detail that needs to be there. So when I'm out painting like this, I try to really pay attention to those subtle nuances and details And I think that's one reason why I got caught up in so many little details on this one at the beginning, is because I was trying to pay attention to those things to really bring out the, that depth and that realism, or at least the, the sense of reality in this scene. So I'm just softening the edge there. So what I do is I wipe off the brush. I clean the brush off from paint and wipe it on the washcloth there, and then I just use what's on the paper. I kind of blend that out, and it kind of soaks up some of the water, blends it out, softens it, and you get a nice soft edge rather than a harsh, hard line. So it's these little nuances that are very important for getting a realistic image, a realistic painting. And it's things that you have to just play around with, and I think that's why using monochrome in your first few paintings and stuff can be very beneficial, because it's basically like just drawing with paint. So you start to really understand how to go about using watercolor and how it's going to react. So here I am putting in some small details once again of some grass and things on the curb. But we're getting close to the end here. I mean, it's a little more than halfway finished now. But once again, I mean, I just spent way too much time on these little details. And now I'm trying to layer some red. There was a red sign on the side of this building. I'm trying to get it in there now. And it's something I should have left a little white spot for, but I had to just kind of put the paint on pretty opaquely. It kind of worked, I think. It wasn't too big of a deal. So now I'm putting in some very bright, trying to put in some very bright red and magenta flowers. There's just some beautiful flowers on the front of this building. And that was one part of the sketch that I really wanted to capture. It was just these beautiful colors in front of the building. These beautiful flowers. So adding in another window there that I should have added earlier. So now I'm going in, I'm trying to add some spots for flowers. A little red, bright red and magenta. Just suggestion of little flowers, little dots here and there. And I think a lot of the painting is still kind of wet, so I end up having some trouble here with it bleeding, kind of bleeding out everywhere and onto the painting, but not a huge deal. No need to panic or anything. So adding some variety to these flowers now. A little bit of yellow and things, just little tiny bits of color. It's kind of hard to see. I don't even know that I really added anything, but and now I'm going in with the greens of the leaves of the flowers and stuff. So this is going to add even just another color to this color harmony so far of this painting, because it's been mostly just reds and purples and grays. So a little bit of green here, I think really going to pop a little bit just with all that red. And I think it just fits real nicely in this color harmony. And it was really out there, so I mean, it's realistic and, just comes across beautifully, I think. Really adds something. I'm just adding little abstract dots here and there, trying to give more than just trying to suggest leaves and stuff rather than just big blobs of paint. Big blobs of leaves. So trying to add little dots here and there, and it really gives you the idea of like foliage and leaves and flowers and stuff. And it definitely adds some interest to the front of the building and to the scene. So that's what I'm going for. Let your eye, it's a contrast to the big flat areas of the road and of the red roof. These little dots and things really add some contrast to the overall scene, I think. So I'm attempting to try to brighten up some of these flowers, but with watercolor, it's pretty tough because the more saturated your color is and opaque it is, kind of the darker it is. And I'm going in with like straight magenta here, really trying to show some colorful flowers, but it's difficult because I'm not painting on the white of the paper anymore. And I know it's probably hard to tell in the video, but when you see the final sketch, you'll see a little variety of color there in the flowers. So all right, so adding some little shadow shapes in these windows there. And once again, see, those are the small details that really matter. Giving some dimensionality to those windows and a sense of reflection, a sense of depth. Kind of softening that a bit. So I'm going in with the really dark color now and trying to put in some of the dark accents, which I think really make this thing pop. It gives it a lot more contrast. But I don't want to put them, I don't want to put too many of them in. I just want to put them in where they actually matter. So that's what I'm trying to do here. There's no doubt you're going to end up making mistakes when you do a painting and stuff. So it's all just, you have to just go for it. And if something looks wrong afterwards, you try to take it off or you just learn from it. So that's what I'm doing here, man. I'm just going for it. I'm going for these dark lines, trying to give some, just trying to look at what's in front of me and simplify it and do my best to capture that. So adding in some kind of darker lines, some kind of shadowing, and just it helps separate the dormers and really gives it some dimension, I think, some perspective. And now I'm just going to soften them a bit. It's also going to lighten them up slightly. So they won't be popping out as much. They'll kind of sink in more to the painting and into the scene. It looks like they'll belong a little bit better. But really added some depth there for the those dormers kind of sticking out on the roof. So yep, so now I'm adding some shadows to the flower pots here. Give them a little bit of depth and shadowing, dimension, showing a sense of light. And now I'm darkening up a line on the side of the building here, and also the street. So, and this really is going to bring the foreground closer to us, closer to the viewer, closer to me. And I really make the sidewalk pop there a little bit, giving a sense of light. Even though it's a cloudy day, there is still a little bit of light here. So, but I am realize the sidewalk is too light. So just going over that, fixing some value problems. And this is the important part now. I'm adding trees that are behind the buildings here. This is this really helps give more depth to the scene. And something that was really missing the entire time is these trees. And that also helps give more color to the scene, more green. So unfortunately, it just took me this till the very end of the painting to actually put these in. But now you can see it has a lot more depth now. So I think that really helped push the the building forward. It just gave overall just more depth to this image. So getting down to the very end here, very last strokes here. I'm not sure what else I could do to this to really make it stronger, but anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this little process video or tutorial video. And I'm just going to be putting the final touches on here in a few minutes, or in the next few seconds here. Final touches, fixing up some of the flowers and stuff. And then I'll show you the finished painting once again. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, and please let me know what you think down below. Hope you're able to learn something from this. And if you have any questions, just post them down in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer them. And actually now I'm adding some splatters. This is the very last thing, and this is what really brings it together. I think gives it a more painterly quality. Added some splatters to the painting. Really fun to do. Loosens it up a bit. So anyway, thank you for watching. Take care of yourself. Peace, my friends. Be sure to check out my other tutorial videos for drawing and painting. Also subscribe to see future episodes. Peace.